Happy Friday to each of you, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Yes, last night the Grizzlies experienced one of their worst performances that we've seen in quite a while for Memphis. But why? Some good news on John Morant, as well as the motivation of still having a chance to set the franchise record in wins, should set up for some good performances for the Grizzlies over the weekend. That, and talking about how the Southwest Division once again has a bright future on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Hey, here we go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, one and all, to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you're having a wonderful start to your Friday. It's a bit lonely without my co-host, DeMichael Cole, but obviously DeMichael has been putting out some great work with the Commercial Appeal, traveling with the team. He's on his way back to Memphis, as are the Grizzlies, and he'll be back with me next week. Of course, we want to remind you can find DeMichael at DeMichaelC on Twitter, myself at StatsSAC on Twitter as well, the show at Locked On Grizz. You can find the podcast wherever it's available: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you choose to listen. That's where we will be, and we'll be free on all podcast platforms. Shawn Coleman here. I've been covering the Grizzlies now coming up on 2 years as your host, now your co-host on Locked On Grizzlies, right for him over at Grizzly Bear Blues. Obviously, a credentialed media member with the Grizzlies, and obviously just someone who enjoys talking Grizzlies basketball, especially with how well they're playing right now. I want to remind you also to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. So the Grizzlies go into Denver last night after they had a pretty good game against the Jazz on Tuesday night, but just were not able to close it out in overtime. The Grizzlies losing 122-114, I believe. That may not be the right score. Anyway, they had lost in overtime to the Jazz. So going into Thursday against the Denver Nuggets, the Grizzlies, now with everybody in place, they had rested a few folks. They had rested a lot of the starters against Phoenix on Friday, rested Dylan Brooks on Tuesday. Everybody besides Ja basically was back on Thursday last night against the Denver Nuggets. And what was the result? The Grizzlies just had one of their worst games that they've played in a while. A clunker, as Taylor Jenkins mentioned, a 122-109 loss. Now, and if you look at the scoreboard, or you look at the stat sheet, the numbers themselves don't necessarily look all that bad. I believe the Grizzlies shot 47% from the field, 39% from three, only lost by 13, but that doesn't reflect that the Grizzlies just did not have it last night. The effort wasn't there. They could not get any stops on defense. The Nuggets were absolutely on fire. Besides Nikola Jokic, the Nuggets early and often in the first quarter after the Grizzlies got off to a start, the Nuggets basically just from the midway through the first quarter through the end of the third, the Nuggets absolutely dominated the Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies simply did not have an answer. And that's what Taylor Jenkins basically, chopped it up to. He said that this is a clunker. The effort was not there as we had hoped it would be. Forget this one, move forward, look forward to the weekend. And that's the other big takeaway from today's activity. Before the game, Taylor Jenkins talking about John Morant. John Morant had recently, over the past 24 to 48 hours, had participated in his first 5-on-5 action. Obviously, we know that Ja enjoys giving these cryptic tweets, and he had shown the smiley face emoji. Just it seemed as if that certainly was an indication that things were going well. So it looks as if, though there was no defined return date for Ja, there's no defined, this is going to be his ramping up. We're going to play him a certain amount of minutes on this certain date over the next 2 days on Saturday or Sunday when the Grizzlies have back-to-back games. Obviously, the goal is to get John Morant in one of those games, and the Grizzlies will certainly manage, his availability as well as, his, ability in general to be able to play. It certainly seems as if there's not been any setbacks. The knee is responding well to normal activity after the game. Desmond Bain and Brandon Clark and others, they talked about how excited it was to potentially get Ja back and that he looked like his normal self in practice. So that's the positive news of the day. Obviously with how the game went last night is that Ja Morant certainly seems to be on the verge of getting back. And while nothing yet has been actually, guaranteed as far as playing time goes, it would seem logical to think that Ja Morant will be able to lace him up this weekend and be able to play at least, a few minutes in one of the two games against the Pelicans or the Celtics. But overall this week, yes, especially coming off last week when the Grizzlies beat the Suns without many of their starters in what was probably their most impressive victory of the season. They then get 2 days off, and they then come out against the Jazz and the Nuggets, and they put on these performances. Sure, it's naturally going to cause a bit of angst, perhaps a bit of a concern. Listen, with how well the Grizzlies have played, and especially when you consider no matter who's been out for the Grizzlies, they've still been playing at the same high level, seeing 2 losses back-to-back for the first time in a while. And especially when the second loss is to the level of the Grizzlies not having the energy that they usually have, I can understand it being a bit of a cause for concern. But this is just naturally something that likely happens when you do not have really anything to play for. The Grizzlies are just simply right now managing the rest of the schedule. They're making sure that they don't push anyone to, heighten the risk of injury. Thankfully, overall, everybody seems to be, fully healthy. And it also seems that, though the numbers though the scoreboard obviously is not reflecting it, the Grizzlies offense in and of itself, yes, it struggled at times on Tuesday against the Jazz, but on Thursday, it was still able to make shots. It was still able to find opportunities. 30 assists last night. So the offense itself wasn't necessarily the problem. It was the defense that just could not stop the Nuggets. But I would imagine that the Grizzlies, going into this weekend against the Pelicans on Saturday and against the Celtics on Sunday, I would imagine the Grizzlies now have a bit of motivation going into the weekend because Desmond Bane, Taylor Jenkins, Brandon Clark, they all talked about it. The energy just simply wasn't there. They mentioned playing 2 back-to-back games in high altitude at the end of the season. I do feel that certainly has something to do with the lack of energy, with the lack of overall performance that we saw last night. And that was the difference in the game, right? The Grizzlies' usual advantage in the paint, off of turnovers, on the offensive boards, on the run, it wasn't there. The Nuggets were able to produce to the Grizzlies' level in all of those areas last night, but the Nuggets made 8 more free throws and 2 more threes and 2 more shots overall. And again, those numbers seemed closer simply because the Grizzlies' reserves played well in the fourth quarter. The Nuggets dominated when it mattered, and that just happens from time to time. These type of games certainly happen. You would rather get them out of the way now than them happen in the playoffs. But back to the point of having motivation, the Grizzlies don't need any extra motivation, but they now have plenty of reason to want to end the season on a good note back at home, getting some momentum going before they have a bit of a lull in between the end of the season as they wait to see who their opponent is from the Western Conference play-in tournament, and then obviously getting to the playoffs, which probably will start sometime next weekend. So especially with Ja Morant being back, yes, it's not been the most ideal of results this week when it comes to Grizzlies basketball, but with how well they've played beforehand, it's not impacting anything as far as the playoffs go. The main thing is the Grizzlies are remaining healthy. They're remaining somewhat effective on offense, and with the franchise record still intact, or the pursuit of the franchise record for wins still something that can be accomplished, that plus getting Ja back, plus wanting to end the season on a good note, certainly should give the Grizzlies plenty of motivation to be able to play well this weekend as they take on the Pelicans as well as the Celtics. But going into this game against the Pelicans, I certainly think that some developments that have occurred late in the season once again points out that while it may have seemed like the Southwest Division was going to take a bit of a step back, with many of the teams coming into this season kind of in limbo when it came to the direction of their franchise, this season certainly has proven that there's a bright future in the Southwest Division, and it may be a bit more competitive than some folks, even in the Grizzlies fan base, might think. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Before we do, I want to talk with you a bit about BetOnline.net. Now, we know that the Grizzlies have been one of the best bets out there when it comes to taking the over in games, being able to win games by big margins. They've been a good team to bet on all season long. But regardless of if it's pro basketball, I know college basketball is over now, but you can bet on anything pro basketball. Baseball is officially back. Boxing, UFC, hockey, golf, the NFL draft, anything and everything that you want to bet on when it comes to sports, it's all out there. But the main thing is finding a place that's fast and easy for you. You don't want to have to go through a bunch of, heartache trying to find the best way to wager and bet on sports. So that's why you need to check out betonline.net. They even have Vegas casino games. Go check out betonline.net today, the fastest and easiest way for you to bet on all the sports that you love. As I mentioned, baseball is back. So that, of course, means you need to check out the Locked On MLB podcast of your choice when it comes to the opening of the season for many teams across Major League Baseball. So many narratives that are out there to enjoy. Make sure you check out your favorite Locked On MLB teams podcast as part of the Locked On Podcast Network as your second listen of the day after checking out Locked On Grizzlies. So as I mentioned, the Grizzlies now obviously have 2 games left this weekend, one against the New Orleans Pelicans, is obviously one against the Boston Celtics. But before the Celtics and Grizzlies play, and the Celtics and Grizzlies, they could or could not. Both the Pelicans and the Celtics could have something to play for, while the Grizzlies, again, are just wanting to maintain health. They're wanting to make sure they get John Morant back healthy. They also, while they do have a bit to play for when it comes to the franchise record, it's the Pelicans and the Celtics who have plenty to play for when it comes to playoff positioning. But this game against the Pelicans once again brings into the spotlight this rivalry that's there between the Grizzlies and the Pelicans. And let's be honest, in Taylor Jenkins' time as head coach, the Pelicans have had the Grizzlies' number overall. This season, though, the Grizzlies have gotten a bit of retribution. They seem to have put those rivalries, the Pelicans have the Grizzlies' numbers. The Grizzlies have kind of put that to bed. But I don't want to take away from how awesome of a turnaround the Pelicans have experienced. And not only in terms of this season, but the fact that some luck has been on their side as well that has allowed for their future to remain bright, even if this season overall has not been as good as many expected. But that's the whole thing about the Southwest Division in general. Right now, the Grizzlies are second place in the West, obviously, at 55-25. They won the Southwest Division for the first time in franchise history. Without a doubt, currently, and moving forward, the Grizzlies clearly have the best trajectory of any team in the Southwest Division. However, I do feel that over the past few months, the future of the Southwest Division looks a lot brighter than many would have considered it, even, at the start of 2022. The improved play of the Spurs, the moves and the improved play that the Pelicans have made. And in my opinion, though, obviously they're nowhere near, where, they probably would like to be in the standings. The Rockets certainly are one of the worst teams in the NBA. The Rockets, just in terms of their young core, they have a bright future as well. But let's kind of go down the list of the Southwest Division. For years, the Southwest Division would be the Western Conference division that would have the 3 or 4 teams in the playoffs. If you go back over the past 15 years or so, especially when you're considering the Dirk years during, his time in Dallas, obviously the dynasty that was the Spurs winning, 5 championships, I believe, in 17 or 18 years, the Grizzlies grit and grind era, the Rockets with James Harden. Obviously, you had plenty of eras where you had 3 or 4 teams each year from the Southwest Division in the NBA playoffs. Well, once again, 4 of the top 10 teams in the Western Conference playoff picture right now are from the Southwest Division. Again, the only team that's not in there is the Houston Rockets. So not only, though, have you seen the competitiveness level of the Spurs and the Pelicans and even the Mavericks, who are making a push for that 3rd spot in the West, that's 3 teams besides the Grizzlies. That's actually 4 teams in the Southwest Division who, when you go back to December, I certainly feel as if anybody would say all 4 teams are in a much more competitive spot than many would have thought they would be right at Thanksgiving, early December. That shows how awesome of a season that all 4 of these teams have had compared to where they were expected to be 4 months ago. But it's not just about right now, correct? It's not just about where we stand right now. It's about the fact that, like the Grizzlies, the future of several of these teams are definitely bright. Obviously, the Mavericks finding their identity as a defensive-first team, supporting Luka's ability on offense under Jason Kidd, that identity has certainly propelled them forward to have one of their best seasons. Arguably their best season under Luka. The Pelicans, obviously the best version of the Pelicans is with Zion Williamson, but he unfortunately has been out for the season. However, General Manager David Griffin has not allowed for that to get in the way of him improving this team. And not only do they trade their first-round pick from 2022 to the Trailblazers to take on C.J. McCollum, who they will have for years after this year, they also lucked into getting the Lakers pick back, which the Grizzlies unfortunately lost. So the Pelicans are not only going to have an opportunity to make the playoffs this year, have C.J. McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Jonas Valanciunas, and others going into next year, but they're also going to have the chance to add to that Zion Williamson potentially, plus another top 10 pick, with plenty of other picks to make a big move in the offseason if they wanted to. The future for the Pelicans, just to be honest with you, it still remains bright. There still is plenty to work with when it comes to the New Orleans Pelicans and their future, especially if a bought-in Zion Williamson is involved. And then you look at the Spurs. Yes, the Spurs may not necessarily have that star-level franchise player to the caliber of a Ja, to the caliber of a Luka, to the caliber of a Zion Williamson, even a Brandon Ingram. But the Spurs do have a good young core. They have an emerging star in DeJounte Murray, and they have 3 first-round picks, I believe, this year, if I'm correct, in the 2022 draft. They have the arsenal to either go get plenty of young talent to add to their core for the future, or potentially, like the Pelicans, be able to put together a package to go get a star in the offseason to partner with Murray. And then, of course, the Houston Rockets, again, they're a few years away, but with Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, and others, they certainly have a core that can grow together and may be able to be more competitive than people might think in the near future. So in no way, shape, or form am I saying that there's a team out there in the Southwest Division that's emerging as being a better team moving forward than the Grizzlies. Again, I feel the Grizzlies clearly have the best, trajectory. They are the most valid contender in the Southwest Division now, and I think moving forward. But I do think when it comes to the Pelicans and the Mavericks especially, you've got plenty of reason to see both those teams continue to improve in the offseason and really challenge the Grizzlies next year, with the Spurs having the ability to do the same if they make the right moves this offseason going into next season, and then perhaps a few years down the line, the Houston Rockets will be able to do the same. So though it may seem like the Southwest Division is set up for the Grizzlies to be the cream of the crop for years to come, there are several teams in the Southwest Division, once again, that are in a prime position to really move themselves up that competitive timeline. And just like we've seen over the past 2 decades, the Southwest Division could be the most competitive division in basketball. Now, I'll say with confidence, I feel the Grizzlies will be just fine. I feel that they're going to win multiple Southwest Division championships over the next 3 to 5 years as they look to remain a contender. But without a shadow of a doubt, it's going to be a very competitive division. And when you compare where the futures of several of the Southwest Division's franchises were back in December to now, it's a lot brighter future, which in a good way, in a good sense, though, you want to have rivalries. You never want to see, your division mates have too positive of a future. It should lead to plenty of fun and competitive basketball for years to come. But that starts tomorrow night with the New Orleans Pelicans coming to face the Memphis Grizzlies. And though the Grizzlies really don't have much to play for, and the Pelicans don't necessarily have too much to play for, when it comes to the overall ability for both teams to end their seasons on a good note, both the Pelicans and the Grizzlies will have plenty of reason, plus that little bit of motivation from the rivalry, to play a great game on Saturday night. But the thing that I'll tell you that will make your day great, whether it be a weekend day or a weekday, is Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. You can have it in the morning for breakfast, have it in the afternoon as a snack. But the great thing about Built Bar is it provides so many awesome tastes. There's Built Bar Puffs, there's Built Bar themselves, over 18 different flavors to choose from. If you go to Built.com right now, you put in the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Make sure you check out all the great options at Built.com today. Next week on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, it's going to be all about preparing for the 2022 NBA playoffs. Obviously, the Grizzlies will not have the advantage knowing who they will be playing until the play-in tournament is completed. We'll have plenty of coverage looking at the play-in tournament. Plus, once we know who the Grizzlies playoff opponent will be, we will absolutely, me and DeMichael both, will be the best spot to break down the upcoming playoff matchup for the Grizzlies. That and much more on next week's editions of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Make sure you check it out. So the New Orleans Pelicans come to Memphis, and obviously that means some familiar faces. Jonas Valanciunas, Brandon Ingram, obviously Grizzlies killer CJ McCollum. And let's be honest, this has already happened. The last time that the Pelicans came to Memphis with CJ McCollum, the Grizzlies were able to get a convincing victory. But this time around, the Pelicans are really starting to fire on all cylinders, especially on offense, with McCollum and Ingram and Jonas Valanciunas. The offensive upside of this Pelicans team, it's not the potential necessarily, it's the production. Since CJ McCollum came over to the New Orleans Pelicans at the 2022 NBA trade deadline, the Pelicans are 7th in the NBA when it comes to offensive rating and 5th in the NBA when it comes to net rating. They're above average, top 10 in the league when it comes to field goal percentage. I believe they're 5th at field goal percentage in the league right now, top 10 in points per game. This Pelicans offense is a very, very good offensive team, and they're able to have that offense catch fire at any point in time. That's the big thing about this Pelicans offense now. When you add CJ McCollum to the mix, when you add stretches of Devontae Graham hitting threes from deep, this is a team that can put together a very, very dominant stretch at any point in time during the game. And we've seen them be able to do that in blowing teams out in the recent past, as well as being able to do it when they've tried to come back. Obviously, one of the more, unfortunate examples of that was a few weeks back where we thought the Lakers were going to get a big win in terms of helping us cement cement the Lakers pick for the 2022 draft. Instead, it was the Pelicans who had one of those just hot offensive stretches that were able to come back and win. And it's not just CJ McCollum. It's not just Brandon Ingram. You've got a lot of very good complementary pieces on this Pelicans team. My point is not to sit here and sing the Pelicans' praises. But my point is this once again proves the point in that who a team was to start an NBA season does not define what they can become towards the end of the season. And this Pelicans team that's playing right now is truly a playoff potential team, even with the fact that they got off to a 1-12 start. So they're going to be a very tough matchup for the Grizzlies tonight or tomorrow night in the FedEx Forum, especially if John Morant may not be available. Now, the other reason why the Pelicans are going to be a tough matchup for the Grizzlies is because the Pelicans, like the Jazz and other teams, the Pelicans do a very good job of controlling the boards. The overall ability for the Grizzlies to be able to earn that possession edge that I think they'll need to earn tomorrow night to win the game, it's going to be harder to establish in this game against the Pelicans than it is most teams. And of course, that becomes the Steven Adams, Jonas Valanciunas matchup. Now, the last time that the Pelicans played in Memphis, the Grizzlies were able to establish early on their style of play. They were able to crash the offensive boards. They were able to get out on the run, so on and so forth. So though on paper, the Pelicans may offer a tougher way for the Grizzlies to be able to establish their usual ways of setting the tone for the game, the Grizzlies were able to do it the last time the Pelicans came to Memphis. So in tomorrow night's game, the big thing to take away is that, yes, the Pelicans are going to have plenty to play for, obviously, to make sure they keep their ninth spot and they're able to host this year's first play-in tournament game in the Western Conference. They want to make sure that they have the ability to host that in New Orleans, the 9-10 game. But the Pelicans also have the motivation of wanting to end the season on a good note by beating the division rivals. The Grizzlies, on the other hand, as I mentioned, they have motivation because they still have a chance to set the franchise record in wins. They want to get John Morant back. But another key opportunity, in my opinion, that the two games this week offer is this. Is with as good as the Pelicans have been offensively, it's going to be a very good barometer to see where the Grizzlies are defensively, especially coming out one of their more lackluster performances in recent memory against the Nuggets last night. So on Saturday night, though it'll be interesting to see who plays, I'm sure the Grizzlies, in at least one of these two games, they may once again sit out several of their major contributors. But in general, on Saturday night, against a very good offensive team in the Pelicans, the Grizzlies' defense is going to be put to the test. And then on Sunday, if Boston has something to play for, one of the better defensive teams in the league are going to put the Grizzlies' offense to the test. I think that's another key takeaway from the end of the season. The fact that the Grizzlies have played the Warriors, the Suns, the Jazz, the Bucks, the Nuggets, and are going to play a very motivated and much better Pelicans team and the Celtics. Once again, this Grizzlies team, over the past 2 or so weeks, they've had the hardest schedule in the NBA. But I do think that's going to pay dividends. I think that has kept this Grizzlies team fresh and crisp enough, or at least we hope they will be, after having a bounce-back performance, hopefully tomorrow and Sunday. I think that this tough schedule could wind up paying dividends because it's made the Grizzlies continue to have to play at a high level, the level that they want to end the season. So a big test for the Grizzlies defense tomorrow night against New Orleans, a big test for the Grizzlies offense against a very good defensive team in Boston. Though there is not necessarily anything to play for in terms of playoff positioning, ending the season on a good note, getting the franchise record in wins, being able to do well in a offensive or in a defensive test on Saturday and an offensive test on Sunday, and obviously wanting to make sure the team is clicking on all cylinders with Ja Morant. Without there being something clear on paper for the Grizzlies to play for, there's clearly enough intangibles out there for the Grizzlies to be motivated to play well. It's going to be a true test of the defense. You certainly have to hope Dillon Brooks, Jaren Jackson Jr., and the rest of the squad will be up to the challenge. And again, while the result may not matter, as long as the Grizzlies are looking good on both sides of the court, that's all that you can ask for before the season ends and before, obviously, the playoffs begin a week from now. So yes, it's not been the best of weeks, but the great thing about it is that the Grizzlies, with how well they've been playing, they've made it to where that doesn't impact anything, and everything's within their control to end the season on a good note this weekend. On Monday, DeMichael Cole and myself will both be back with you, ready to discuss all the takeaways from the weekend against New Orleans and Boston, and obviously looking at the season as a whole before we look forward to the playoffs. All that next week on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy the opening weekend of baseball. Enjoy back-to-back Grizzlies games. We're going to sit here and enjoy a bit of time to reflect on the season, but overall, it's a time to celebrate what it's been an awesome season for the Grizzlies before things really start to get meaningful in the playoffs. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon here